So today, we're going to dive into a condition that often gets overshadowed by its more famous relative, complex PTSD. We're going to break down what it is, how it's different from what you might already know about PTSD, and, most importantly, talk about the clear, structured path that exists for recovery. All right, let's get into it. Think about it for a second. When you hear the letters PTSD, what image pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably a single, shocking event, right? Like a bad car accident, a natural disaster, or maybe a soldier's experience in a war zone. And that's definitely part of the picture. But it's not the whole story, not even close.
Because for so many people, trauma isn't just one single moment that happens and is over. It's something that goes on, something they can't escape. It's less like a sudden lightning strike and more like a long, brutal season you have to endure. And that, right there, is where we start to understand complex PTSD.
All right, so here's the journey we're going to take together in this explainer. First, we'll look beyond that single event idea to really get the roots of CPTSD. Then we'll pin down what the condition actually is, and finally, we'll walk through the three-phase roadmap for recovery, finding stability, processing memories, and rebuilding a life.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. The root cause. Complex PTSD, or CPTSD for short, doesn't come from a single event. It grows out of chronic trauma. We're talking about situations with prolonged, intense stress where getting away feels, or actually is, impossible. This could be things like long-term childhood abuse, ongoing domestic violence, or being held as a prisoner of war.
And this, right here, is the absolute key difference. While PTSD can definitely come from one terrifying moment, CPTSD is the result of trauma that's sustained over time. It's the long-term nature of it, that feeling of being trapped, that really changes how it impacts a person's entire being.
All right, so what exactly is this diagnosis? Well, to really get a handle on CPTSD, we first need to make sure we're clear on what standard PTSD looks like, because complex PTSD literally builds right on top of it.
So, according to the big international guidelines, PTSD has three main pillars. First, there's re-experiencing the trauma. Think flashbacks or nightmares. Second, there's actively avoiding anything and everything that reminds you of what happened. And third, there's this constant feeling of being on high alert, a persistent sense of threat, like something bad is always about to happen.
Okay, this is where it all clicks into place. Someone with complex PTSD has all three of those core PTSD symptoms we just talked about. But there's an extra layer of difficulty. It's a whole other set of challenges called disturbances in self-organization. So the main takeaway here is pretty simple. CPTSD is basically PTSD plus these additional struggles.
So what are these disturbances? Well, first, we're talking about huge difficulties in managing emotions. This can look like really intense mood swings or sometimes just feeling completely numb. Second, it can create these deeply ingrained negative beliefs about yourself, feeling worthless, defeated, or just broken. And third, it causes persistent problems with relationships, building them, keeping them, trusting people. These three things are what put the complex in complex PTSD.
Now, I know that all sounds incredibly daunting, but as we shift from the problem to the solution, here's the really, really hopeful part. There is a well-researched, structured way to treat this. It's definitely not a quick fix, but it is a clear path forward.
And that path is widely known as the three-phase model. It all starts with stabilization, then it moves into trauma processing, and it finishes with reintegration. This step-by-step approach is absolutely crucial, because think about it. You can't heal from trauma that shattered your sense of safety until you first rebuild that very foundation. It's also worth noting that healing isn't always a straight line. People often circle back to an earlier phase when they need to, and that's perfectly okay.
So let's dive into that first and most fundamental phase, finding stability. You can't start digging into deep-seated trauma if you don't even feel safe in your own skin. In this very moment, this whole phase is about building that solid ground underneath your feet.
The goals here are super practical. It's about creating a sense of safety right here, right now. It's about learning to manage those really overwhelming symptoms and getting a better handle on your emotions. A huge piece of this is also just understanding why you're reacting the way you are, why your body and brain are doing what they're doing. And most critically, it's about learning real, tangible grounding skills to pull yourself back from things like flashbacks or dissociation.
This diagram here, the defense cascade, really shows why phase 1 is so important. It basically maps out our body's natural survival responses to a threat. That initial freeze, then maybe fight or flight, and if things get really bad, a total shutdown.
The thing with prolonged trauma is that a person's nervous system can get stuck in one of these modes. The skills you learn in phase 1 are all about learning how to regulate that system, to bring yourself back into a place of safety where you can actually begin the deeper work of healing.
So once that foundation of safety and stability is really there, the work can shift. Now we move into the second phase, which is all about directly addressing and processing the traumatic memories. And this is always done very carefully with the help of a trained therapist.
This quote from Judith Herman, who's a real pioneer in this field, just captures the spirit of this stage so perfectly. It's not just about remembering what happened, it's also about mourning everything that was lost because of the trauma. The loss of safety, the loss of childhood, the loss of trust. It's a true process of grieving.
And this isn't just talk therapy. This processing work is guided by specific evidence-based treatments. You've got things like trauma-focused CBT, which helps change the way you think about the trauma, EMDR, which uses eye movements to help the brain process stuck memories, and narrative exposure therapy, which helps you build a coherent story of your life. They're all designed to help you work through these memories safely without re-traumatizing yourself.
And all of that work brings us to the final, really forward-looking phase of recovery. After doing the incredibly hard work of processing the past, the focus finally gets to shift toward building a meaningful future.
You see, trauma, and especially complex trauma, is profoundly isolating. It can shrink your whole world. So this final phase is all about reconnection. It's about finally moving out of that constant survival mode and starting to carefully, safely re-engage with the world, with your community, and with other people.
And at the absolute heart of this phase is rebuilding trust. It's about learning to trust your own gut and your own judgment again, because trauma can really destroy that. And it's about learning how to safely and slowly trust other people again, rebuilding those bridges that the trauma may have burned down.
And when you put it all together, the ultimate goal is to reclaim a life that is truly your own. To move from that feeling of powerlessness, which is so central to trauma, to a place where you have a sense of control and power over your own story and your own future.
So, if there's one thing to really take away from all this, it's this. Healing from complex trauma, it's not about erasing the past or forgetting what happened. That's impossible. It's about integrating those experiences into the story of your life so they no longer control your present and you can finally build a new and meaningful future.
And just so you know, the information we've been walking through today is grounded in the incredibly thorough guidelines from the UK Psychological Trauma Society. It really represents the best of our current clinical understanding and research in this field. And all this brings us to one last, really important question. Understanding this individual journey is a huge first step, but the next step is asking, how can we, as a whole society, in our jobs, in our schools, in our communities, create spaces that are more aware and more compassionate about the realities of complex trauma? That, really, is the challenge for all of us. Thanks for joining me.